Nature has been unkind to these volcanic islands, yet the Canary archipelago has preserved, against great pressures from mass tourism, magnificent open spaces that you are about to discover. Their close cultural ties with South America, their proximity to the North African coast, set the Canary Islands at a crossroads in the Atlantic Ocean, on routes opened by Christopher Columbus. But beyond the cliches, this Spanish archipelago remains a well-kept secret. Each island offers its share of surprises. All have their own character, where art often blends with natural and wild settings, and where the charm of traditional villages merges with spectacular deserted beaches. Tenerife is the largest of the archipelago's islands, and no doubt the most famous. Arriving from the north coast is recommended to visualize the extent of the volcanic outbreak that shook the island some 300 years ago. Up to 1706, Garachicho was the prosperous main harbor of Tenerife until one day a gigantic volcanic explosion covered it with lava. At the end of these waves imprisoned in lava, then carved out by the ocean, a string of natural pools runs along the village. To the rhythm of the swells and tides, these pools are regularly filled up and permanently regenerated. An area of privileged fishing for some, and of protected sea baths for others, enjoying these natural pools remains an exceptional pleasure for all. In the large canyon that was flooded by lava, nature has once again taken the upper hand. Yet, the inescapable black lava rock is still used on many buildings. There was a time when some must have believed the town was doomed, with its violent storms, floods, fires, epidemics, and to top it all, the horrible eruption of 1706 that buried the harbor and half the town under lava. Several buildings survived around the Plaza Libertad, such as the Convent of San Francis and the church. But today the village is turned towards the future. It welcomes visitors who've come to hike or enjoy the natural pools. Along the northwestern coast, haciendas or farms overlook the banana and cactus plantations. By having kept the colonial Hispanic touch, they give the coast an undeniable charm. By climbing higher, we reach the first pine forests, a sign that we're nearing the Pico del Teide, the imposing volcano of the island. At 2,000 meters in altitude, the scenery of a science fiction novel unfolds, with volcanic rocks caught in unlikely sculptures. Since 1954, these exceptional formations have been protected by a national park. In an almost supernatural display of light, the Pico del Teide is outlined in the distance, fringed with transparent fumaroles. Spreading out over 180 square kilometers, this is the largest of Spain's national parks, a place where chaos has created supernatural landscapes. The Teide is the highest mountain in Spain, with an altitude of 3,718 meters. In winter, it has on occasion been totally covered with snow. But when this happens, the sun quickly begins to give the rock its raw color back. To reach the summit, a trail meanders between the black rock and the last snow patches left over from a recent storm. The crater dominates the entire island and is covered with a thin coat of sulfur that escapes in small puffs from its bowels. Measurements have revealed that the volcano rejects 100 tons of carbon dioxide every day. The last eruption occurred in 1798 and came from a neighboring volcano, the Pico Viejo. The Teide is being permanently monitored, but there's no reason to worry. It may be active, but it is in a resting phase. A veil of mist hides the other islands far off on the ocean, but this doesn't spoil the magic of this site. The village closest to the volcano is called Villaflore, with its 2 churches, one of which is entirely built with volcanic rock. Living under the constant threat of such a tremendous natural power, throughout the centuries the villagers' only recourse was to believe in the protection of the Holy Spirit. The altar of the San Pedro Church is totally built in wood from forest near the volcano, located above the village. By heading back to the sea towards the south, these formations are marked by their intense history. The Canary Islanders even call these cliffs the gigantes or giants, as several reach 600 meters in height. Historically, the center of the island and the elevated villages were more populated than the coast with their fishermen villages. Mechanized harvesting gradually replaced terrace farming, yet it shaped the villages whose houses are spread out and follow the movement of the hillside. Cactus plants are everywhere on the Canary Islands. In the past, cochineals used them for their habitat and their food. These tiny insects are still collected today. They produce tiny amounts of a precious red substance used in dyes and cosmetics. One of the best preserved coasts of the island is the western tip, which locals call the North. Around Los Silos, banana plantations have multiplied. This is a recent mutation. Since the beginning of the 17th century, the region supplied the entire island with wheat, thus the village's name. Los Silos is a rural village with character. In addition to its wheat, the village also has lime kilns and sugar refineries, making it the major local economic center. With the Church of La Señora de la Luz, this village doesn't quite respect the tradition like its neighbors, as the edifice is sparkling white instead of volcanic gray. The traveler wishing to continue to the tip of the island will discover a most unexpected view. This contrasts with the overcrowded beaches in the south. The large village square of Buena Vista is often overcrowded, yet on Sunday afternoons it's calm and peaceful. The locals take time to chat and let the afternoon unfold without the slightest pressure. A drive above these villages will display other Tenerife treasures. First, you must bypass a few farms, then follow the road that crawls up the mountain of Del Agua, then continue on forest roads. In these seldom visited sites, the traveler will discover Laura Silva, an exuberant forest mainly with laurel trees and ferns. This type of vegetation disappeared from the Mediterranean region during the Tertiary period and has only survived in this area. The Laura Silvas are subtropical forests whose characteristics are high humidity and fairly stable temperatures. In its most primitive state, this forest is made up of roughly 20 different tree species, under which numerous varieties of fern, moss, and other plants enjoy the darkness of the undergrowth. Today, only a few paths allow us to reach these forests that are given particular care and protection. La Orotava is one of the prettiest towns of the island. It's set in the heart of one of the richest valleys of Tenerife. The building of the town started in the 16th century. Wealthy Spanish had churches and landowner houses built there. The gardens of the Marquis de la Quinta Roja are from the 19th century. Designed by the Frenchman Adolphe Coquet, they cascade down the hill. La Orotava is an old and dense city. It has preserved its historical touch. It is the jewel of the northwestern coast. The Church of La Concepcion is one of the most beautiful samples of Baroque architecture on the archipelago. Towards the more elevated part of La Orotava, the narrow streets lead to ancient homes, some of which are still inhabited by old Canarian families. Others are maintained as a museum or as a bed and breakfast. These manor houses are typical of the Canary Islands. Some, like the Casa Lercaro, are from the 17th century. In the summer, they welcome concerts in their gardens. Heading back to the eastern part of the island, the demographic pressure intensifies. La Laguna, near the capital Santa Cruz, has managed nevertheless to preserve its charm, especially in its historical central district. The old town was built based on precise philosophical and scientific principles, using among others the works of Leonardo da Vinci. These principles were then used as models for several capitals and cities of colonized Latin America. In addition to being an important military town during the 16th century, La Laguna also became a major religious center with numerous monasteries and convents. The notion of ideal city developed in the works of Da Vinci and then applied by the Spanish colonizers allowed La Laguna to remain the capital of the island for a long time and preserve a better part of its old neighborhoods. The town isn't fortified. As a result, the city's layout was able to expand pleasantly. Today, La Laguna has become a suburb of the capital Santa Cruz. History was turned around, and after 1805, Santa Cruz freed itself from the hold of La Laguna, whose importance decreased after the season of Garachico. The first occupants of Tenerife are said to have come from North Africa around 200 years BC. They were called the Guanches, and these statues testified for the posterity of their legendary strength and courage. Much more unusual, this site near the ocean cuts its shape against the sky. It is a strong symbol of the city. The Auditorio of Tenerife was designed by the Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava and reminds us of the Sydney Opera House. The rest of the city incites to quickly climb towards the northeast and head for the Anaga Mountains, considered to be the most ancient part of this island. This space has succeeded for the most part to remain wild. It is often caught in mist and clouds, offering a staggering contrast to the densely populated capital only a few kilometers away. It is also in this part of the island that one can still find a primary forest of laurel trees. Heading to the northeast of the archipelago, we arrive on the island of Lanzarote. Lanzarote is a huge volcanic field, giving the strange impression that it was recently plowed. Today, the Timanfaya Park protects these open spaces from the greed of promoters. Nature has remained untouched here by any construction and offers a unique sight. At the heart of the park's 501 square kilometers, the Montañas del Fuego, or the Fire Mountains, really deserve their name. They are what is left over from an eruption that occurred in September 1730, one of the most spectacular episodes in the history of our planet's volcanoes, that generated more than 48 million cubic meters of lava. In the park, this succession of craters is probably unique in the world. Life has almost disappeared from this area, yet the slopes of the volcanoes are slowly being colonized by the Carcos avenegrera, a plant imported by goat breeders from the neighboring island of Palma. The temperature climbs very quickly a few centimeters from the surface. It only takes spreading a few dry sprigs to rapidly light a fire. Same observation with water poured on the ground. The geyser effect is immediate. Heading back to the center of the island, Teide is one of the historical villages of Lanzarote. Here, moods of a Spanish pueblo alternate with the atmosphere of a Medina on the North African coast, only roughly 100 kilometers away. Teide is somewhat of a small oasis among the bare central plains of the island. A few monuments and pretty houses remind us that Teide was the capital of Lanzarote until 1852. In the village are several churches and convents. But wandering the narrow streets, the workshop of Antonio Hernandez attracted our attention. He is one of the last violin makers of the island, who also makes the timple, a traditional instrument. How much time is required to make a timple? Well, some models are more economical. It takes 3 or 4 days to make them. And which type of wood do you use? Oh, we use rosewood, pine, acacia, and sapele wood. As young locals don't see much of a future in this work, Antonio is indeed the last violin maker on Lanzarote, and one of the last in the entire archipelago. The timple is regularly heard in local folklore, or used within large formations such as you see here. Heading north, the houses become more scarce and the volcanic rocks more and more present as the coast faces an ocean that can be dreadful when the swell is very strong. Beginning at the Mirador del Rio in the northern part of the island, long empty beaches sprawl out not far from the small neighboring island of La Graciosa. In the past, the Spaniards set up gun batteries to protect El Rio, a strait that separates the two islands and was very strategic at the time. Following the coast to the north leads to Famara, a peaceful and entirely white village that strings along a large beach of black sand and pebbles, a somewhat rough decorum, but very appreciated by the islanders of the archipelago. This isn't the most hospitable part of the island. It is only after the small village of La Santa that a more serene atmosphere reappears. This fishing village may be seen as an exception. It faces an often agitated ocean, and it's far from the rest of the island. New European regulations have totally decimated fishing, allowing only a few boats to drop their anchor for local needs. But aficionados know it is a privileged sight to fully take in at a sunset on the ocean. If Lanzarote has kept all its charm, it owes this mainly to one man, César Manrique. Not a single corner of the island has not been influenced by the artist. One could call him a visionary. As soon as the 1960s, he foresaw what was to become mass tourism in the Canary Islands. He decided to associate artistic creation with respect for nature and the preservation of his island. César Manrique was also a painter and sculptor and created many wind-animated mobiles found at several intersections on the island. Since his death in an accident in 1992, his house has become a museum. César Manrique used the lava and its cavities in their raw state to create a refined avant-garde home. His house also became home to the foundation that continues the action undertaken by the artist in the conservation of the island's environment. The foundation develops artistic activities around Manrique's work. For his house, he used 5 volcanic bubbles left after the 1730 eruption, thus creating an unique living space. With its strong contrast, the pool is as characteristic as a Manrique signature can be, and is to be found elsewhere on the island. Influenced by Picasso and Matisse, César Manrique spent several years in New York, where he had successful exhibits. But the call of his native island was stronger. In 1968, he came home with a ton of ideas, destined to enhance the beauty of Lanzarote that he considered incomparable. These mobile sculptures along the roads are the most obvious signature of the artist. Whether designing hotels or natural pools, César Manrique was very creative. At the time, he also succeeded in obtaining that no advertising billboards be authorized on the island. And to this day, this hasn't changed, even though pressure from promoters has significantly increased. North of Guanche, this garden, exclusively with cactus plants, also is a testimony of Manrique's desire to safeguard and share these natural settings. Today we can say that it is mainly his campaign for the protection of traditional architecture and of the environment that forced the government to pass laws restricting the island's urbanization. This ancient quarry looks like a giant piece of art rather than a botanical garden, despite the presence of approximately 1,500 carefully identified species. All these cacti were gathered by the botanist González Ferrer with specimens from Madagascar, Africa and Mexico. Lanzarote is the island most marked by the intensity of recent volcanic activity. Yet, through intense work and imagination, the islanders managed to cultivate the famous papas, small potatoes that arrived in ancient times from Peru. But the most amazing sight remains the valley of the Guajira, where the traveler discovers several large vineyards. The vines are planted in small basins whose purpose is to protect them from the wind. The roots will then seep deeply enough into the ground to reach the sandier layer of the terrain. Vineyards have been on the island for several centuries. Cultivating vineyards is very ancient here in Lanzarote. In his day, Shakespeare had already praised the quality of wine of the Canary Islands. This bodega is a new project and is little over 10 years old. The Bodega Stratus has an unexpected feature, its concept. The natural cavities of the Barranco del Obispo were followed. The wine storehouses were totally built inside the ravine and in the volcanic rock. Lanzarote cannot easily escape its tormented past, especially on the western coast that is closer to the Mountain of Fire. The ocean, with wind and rain, has sculpted amazing beaches, making them exceptional sights. At El Golfo, the Lago de los Clicos produces shades of color never seen on other beaches. And at Las Hervederos, a few kilometers further south, the swell continues its work of patiently digging into the volcanic rock. Only the salt plains of Janubio slightly soften the outline of this wild coast. The island of Gran Canaria, with that of Tenerife, holds a central place among the Canary Islands. It's only third in size, but half the population of the archipelago lives here. It is recommended to approach it through one of these barrancos or ravines that lead to the middle of the island. Here the volcanic period is far more ancient than on Lanzarote or Tenerife. The villages are cuddled up in plentiful green valleys. Gran Canaria is the only island of the archipelago to be almost round in shape. The village of San Bartolome, near the middle of the island, is its highest point. Even if it isn't obvious, nature has been more generous here. As you progressively reach higher altitudes, a diversity of fields and cultures unfold. Rain is also slightly more abundant on the island. Several reservoirs, such as here in Araia, provide the island with water and give the mountain striking colors. Continuing towards the center, once again, the landscape changes. The forest thickens, the peaks are outlined on the horizon. We are now in the Tamadaba mountain chain. With its 1,949 meters, the Pozo de las Nieves is the highest point of the island, surrounded by the sacred mountain of Roque Bentaiga and Roque Nublo. Heading back towards the waterfront, Agüimes is a small town built around its church. San Sebastian was built in 1780 with a dome that has 12 large windows for the 12 apostles. It is considered to be one of the best samples of Canarian neoclassicism. Like other towns of the archipelago, its history was troubled, particularly when the Guanches were invaded by several waves of Spanish colonization. The central district around the Plaza del Rosario was perfectly restored and is lined with beautiful examples of Canarian architecture. This old city was founded in 1486 by the Castilian kingdom that had recently occupied the island. Juan Alvarez Mendizabal took possession of it in 1837, but all along its history, the architecture and the style of the city was preserved. As a result, it is one of the best conserved old districts of the archipelago. Be it the paved streets, the flat roofs, the woodwork, the tradition of the time is still very present when you stroll along its narrow streets. Ingenio, the neighboring village, was practically drawn out on the same principle, but it's mainly a village of artisans where cherished embroidery and pottery can be found. Francisco is a ceramist. He is often inspired by the work of the Guanches, the island's indigenous population.
This is
traditional, this is indigenous craft. The original islanders were the Guanches. They lived here way before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. The conquistadors arrived between 1400 and 1500. At the southern tip of the island, Maspalomas attracts tourists from all over Europe who come for one thing only, to enjoy the sun. The dunes of Maspalomas have survived this predominantly concrete universe, and they represent a sort of peaceful no man's land outside of time. After Maspalomas and further up the western coast, the scenery doesn't change. The visitor must reach Puerto Morgan to find once again a more balanced space. Here, as on the other islands, fishing has been reduced to a few boats that go out to sea to provide for restaurants. At times, restaurants even directly own a boat, guaranteeing a regular supply of fish. The road that leads to the village of Morgan shows ancient geological strata. The volcanic rock with traces of sulfur creates an original site. The road meanders for a long time along the mountain before diving towards the northwest coast, where the unavoidable banana greenhouses emerge. For the island, this is an important economical market, since the archipelago manages to sell its production in metropolitan Spain. The harbor of San Nicolas has also become a symbol. It precedes a coast beaten by waves with imposing rocks. The road has a hard time following such a tormented relief. The cliffs drop abruptly into the water, and the site gives off a feeling of unquestionable power. A little further north, in Puerto de las Nieves, the major attraction used to be this rocky spire called God's Finger. It was decapitated a few years ago by a cyclone, thus ending business for the local restaurants. On the northern coast, the important families owned old haciendas such as the Marquiones of Arucas, who transformed her farm, dating back to 1572, into a bed and breakfast, with true character set among the banana fields. Perfectly renovated, the building is the oldest home on the island. A short distance from the hacienda, the private residence of the family has a beautiful garden at the gates of the city of Arucas. Arucas amazes the visitors with this strange cathedral, whose construction started in 1906 to be finished 70 years later. It offers a striking contrast to the surrounding white houses. With its sophisticated spires, this church, created by a Catalan architect, shares certain family traits with the very famous Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. It was entirely built with stones chiseled in the quarries near the city. Travelers, a little curious, can discover old houses from the 17th century through a slightly open gate, such as this one with its magnificent courtyard that belongs to the cultural center. Arucas is proud of its past. You may even find bars in historical buildings. Leaving Arucas for the center of the island, we arrive in the astonishing village of Terror. Contrary to what its name may recall, this is a very peaceful town and has been a major place of pilgrimage ever since the 15th century. The Virgin is said to have been seen at the top of a local pine tree. Several homes are from the 17th century and give the village an incomparable cachet. Even the more recent buildings have kept the architectural style of the time. The north of the island is dominated by the capital, Las Palmas, the largest city of the Canary Islands. Including its suburbs, the city spreads on each side of the ocean. Located in the heart of the city, the Las Cantaras beach is the most famous and most crowded. The old neighborhood of La Vigueta is in itself a history book that unfolds as you discover its buildings. Las Palmas has always been a major strategic harbor and a trade center. Christopher Columbus is said to have shortly stayed here prior to returning to sea towards the west. Las Palmas greatly profited from the Spanish conquest of Latin America. The archipelago also became a choice target for pirates. In the end, Santa Cruz of Tenerife gained the political upper hand by becoming the capital. At the end of the 19th century, Las Palmas flourished again, thanks to the infatuation of the British. Up to the beginning of World War II, it was a privileged stopover for transatlantic liners. To finish our journey in this archipelago, we navigate towards the northeast to Fuerteventura, no doubt the island that's preserved its most authentic and wild character. The boat anchors in Corralejo, the main city of the northern tip of the island. With the help of the trade winds, the weather is clear in the bay with the island of Lobos on our right. The town of Playa Blanca on Lanzarote detaches itself on the horizon. With climatic conditions which sometimes qualify as an eternal spring, the coast of the Canary Islands have what it takes to attract surfers. The ties with the Latin American colonies have deeply influenced culture in these islands. The carnival of Corralejo, although more human in size, shows an obvious resemblance to those of the South American megapoles such as Rio or even Caracas. It's one of the major events on the island. Corralejo is the last stage of these colorful parades on these islands. Every float is managed by a family or business, and given the size of a city, almost everybody knows each other. Sounds blend from salsa to samba. The rhythm is steady. The festivities will continue late into the night. Fuerteventura is the archipelago island closest to the African coast. Cap Rubi in Morocco is only 100 kilometers away. The dunes of Corralejo are thus a foretaste of the African continent and its deserts. As opposed to the other islands, Fuerteventura has the advantage of numerous white sandy beaches. The natural park of Corralejo that protects the dunes is trying as best it can to withstand the pressure of tourism. Several major hotels have already been built there on the edge of the park, and making tourists respect these dunes isn't always an easy task. Until recently, there was neither electricity nor running water on the islands, and especially on Fuerteventura. Here, in Alcoguita, an entire village was renovated and transformed to show how traditional habitat and living were organized. These restored homes are wrapped in nostalgia and possess an undeniable charm. However, one must remember that at the time, living conditions were rough. Life went on to the rhythm of corn crops and breeding. Herds of dromedaries were introduced during the 15th century by merchants from the Sahara Desert. They adapted so well that today the Majorero race only exists in the Canary Islands. On the island there were several options to grind corn and barley: the wind, man, or donkey. Today a few windmills still work, and corn and barley are still present in the archipelago's daily foods, especially in the gofio, a traditional dish. The Guanches, the first tribe to come to the islands, already lived during prehistoric times. They left some evidence of their lifestyle prior to the arrival of the Spanish colonists. The Hispanic influence was then overwhelming, and it is only recently that the culture and the past of the Guanches has been revived on a few islands. The volcanic impact may be more ancient and less present than on neighboring islands, but the western coast is still rough. Excepting a few fishermen's houses, traces of life are rare. Fuerteventura is an arid island that is practically a desert with very little water. This lack in water can be seen near the national park of Betancuria, where the round hills can change their appearance depending on rare rains. Like an oasis, villages nestle at the bottom of these valleys. Some are historics, such as that of Pareja, with its 17th century church inspired by the Aztecs. It is a beautiful illustration of the Latin American influence, in this case from Mexico. When the island was colonized in 1405, most of the population lived in these valleys, away from an ocean considered to be hostile. The village of Betancuria is also historical. In 1405, a Norman lord, Jean de Betancourt, gave the place his name after invading this part of the island. He had his main residence and chapel built here. During the 15th century, Franciscans came here and developed the city that remained the capital until 1834. Leaving the center of the island towards the south, the coast stretches out. The sand is whiter. The long beaches are swept by the trade winds, such as here at Sotavento. They have become a mandatory spot for any self-respecting nomadic windsurfer. The The northeastern coast is also exposed to the winds and swells. Thanks to the initiatives of its inhabitants and passionate sea lovers, these cliffs and beaches have been protected from any excessive mass tourism. The beach of El Cotillo is one of the sites that are a treat for special windsurfing magazines. This legend is shared by numerous aficionados from mainland Europe or those living here year-round. The village of El Cotillo and its apparent quietness are protected by a massive dike from the winter storms, whose swells at times rise 7 or 8 meters high. At the beginning of the summer season, the few fishing boats left take advantage of the plentiful waters, but only to supply local needs. The local fishing industry has disappeared since European standards have been imposed. The lighthouse of Tostón marks the entrance of a natural reserve that spreads to Corralejo. In the summer, it has a hard time withstanding the invasion of campers. Heading north to La Oliva, the scenery remains pretty much the same. It's very arid, yet has a minimum of vegetation to set off some lovely colors. Goat herds are frequent sight here. Within the archipelago, their reputation is well established. There are more than 35 different species of them, some of which only exist on this island. These goats are pampered, as they are needed to make the famous queso, a fresh, soft paste cheese. To continue producing this specialty, numerous small artisan businesses truly suffered when they had to conform to European Union regulations regarding sanitary norms, even though this tradition is several centuries old. Angela has prepared a recipe for more than 40 years. To obtain this special taste of the queso requires a lot of patience, slow, repeated movements, and the application of pressure on certain points. That of Fuerteventura is the most famous of all the islands. The cheese is refined during at least a week. Well, this cheese was made yesterday. To press a cheese of this size requires roughly half an hour. Depending on the taste, this cheese can age much longer or be seasoned with hot spices or herbs. For decades, corn was one of the basic foods of the Canarian diet. Marco shows us his recipe for gofio. This is how I prepare a corn gofio. I use red mojo that contains garlic, cumin, olive oil, vinegar, and paprika. All ingredients are crushed in a mortar.
Esto es un refrito de ajo y aceite de oliva. Y un poquito de hierba huerto para darle.
I add some fresh herbs from the garden for taste.
El agua del pescado.
And then some very hot fish broth. In former times, gofio was the basic food of the Canarian diet. We ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Marco has joined other Canarians who've understood the need to defend their local culture. In addition to cooking, he is helping his friend Jose bring about a renaissance of the traditional sport, the Juego del Palo, or Game of the Stick. These sticks cut in the wood of the laurel forest were used by shepherds. In the hands of those who master the technique, they can become fearful weapons. Jose Vera also practices stick fencing that used to allow shepherds to go quickly down the steep mountains by doing the Salto del Pastor using the lata, a long pole covered with pork grease. For the traveler willing to discover them, all these islands hold treasures, such as the magical bay beyond El Cotillo, where the winds and waves have created beautiful protected beaches, far from the resorts and crowds of tourists. The tenacity of the inhabitants of the northern coast to defend their heritage played a major role in preserving so well these amazing sites for us. In addition, the real estate frenzy of the past few years is subsiding to the benefit of a more durable and respectful attitude towards the environment. As a result, these beaches will no doubt be enjoyed by generations to come, and also spread the notion that the Canary Islands still have magnificent sights to offer.